I never imagined even starting a business or that I would take it full time or that it would be what it is today. But it really took off. And within a few months, I had gone down from full time to part time at my job. Within 6 months of that, the COVID pandemic hit. My organization laid off 75% of staff. I was one of those. And it ended up being this pivotal moment that was actually the best thing that could have happened. It's been a wild ride. And within a couple of months of that, I started bringing people on board, and I guess the rest is history.
Welcome to Life After Corporate, your ultimate guide for making the leap from corporate leader to entrepreneur. I'm Deb Boulanger, entrepreneur, executive leader, and founder of the Launch Lab for Women Entrepreneurs. This is your time to break through the glass ceiling once and for all and get your ticket to the C-suite. Come back each week to get the leading strategies, advice, and tools that will give you the skills and confidence you need to replace your corporate paycheck. Are you ready? Let's go. Are you inconsistent with your content? Is your messaging scattered? Are you throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok? Well, today we're going to talk about the importance of creating a content strategy and backing it up with really great words so that you can attract your ideal client. And my guest today is Afton Brazzoni, the founder of Scribe National, a content studio that helps B2B marketers and entrepreneurs drive demand and growth with strategic brand messaging and high-quality original content. Afton and her team have the pleasure of working with more than 80 clients worldwide over the last 4 years, the majority being repeat clients. We always love the repeat clients, including billion-dollar enterprises and others among Canada's top 50 fastest-growing companies. Afton is a former journalist, and that's what puts her in a special class. And when she's not working, she's spending time with her husband and her 2 French bulldogs. Welcome to Life After Corporate, Afton.
Thank you so much for having me, Deb.
And what are the doggies' names?
Winston and Duke.
Winston and Duke. Is there a story behind the names?
Honestly, no. We just thought that they sounded very regal and sophisticated, which is not how I would describe a French bulldog if anyone has ever met one. But yeah, they're my little buddies here.
They do sound very royal. All right. So today we're going to talk about content. If content is queen and it is key to driving conversions with your ideal audience, because I think most people fail to realize that every interaction with your content is a micro conversion that's leading them toward an eventual sale. So with that, let's dive into your background. What kind of journalist were you when you were practicing journalism, and what led you to start your own business?
I love, just these stories of entrepreneurship. I think everyone has such an interesting story. And I always say that that's really the common thread that's connected through journalism to communications to marketing where I am today. So I got started about almost 15 years ago now in the journalism field. Now, I didn't stay there for very long because this was around the time where the Great Recession had happened recently. There was a ton of upheaval in that industry with everything moving online and a lot of print publications actually closing down. So I worked in weekly news in a mountain town here in Canada. And I would always joke that the front page of the paper would be like a picture of a grizzly bear. And I mean, really, it wasn't a joke. It was true, but it was quite funny just sort of what the hot topics were in the news. And it's so contextual, obviously, depending on where you live. But that's how I got my start. And I did also freelance for various publications. I'm originally from Eastern Canada, so kind of some of the bigger cities back there and things like that. But what I really loved about that industry was the fact that you meet so many interesting people and you learn so many different things. And you really have to do your research and kind of step into those shoes to be able to tell that story to a broader audience. You really have to dial into their expertise and learn how to translate it at a level that will resonate with a larger number of people. And that's one of the things that I bring into marketing today. So about 4 years ago, I was working in marketing in-house at an arts organization. And I was really feeling like I wasn't getting the opportunity to do enough writing. As much as I love the job and as much as I love the team, writing is my craft, and it's really what, gets me up every day, motivates me to do the work that I do. And I just found that that was lacking. So I thought at first that I would just add some freelance clients to my roster. I never imagined even starting a business or that I would take it full time or that it would be what it is today. But it really took off. And within a few months, I had gone down from full time to part time at my job. Within 6 months of that, the COVID pandemic hit. My organization laid off 75% of staff. I was one of those. And it ended up being this pivotal moment that was actually the best thing that could have happened, because it enabled Scribe National to really take off, because I finally had the time to dedicate to that. Yeah, it was, it's been a wild ride. And within a couple of months of that, I started bringing people on board, and I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, what a happy accident, right? So you're not a planned entrepreneur, kind of happened as a side hustle and then grew from there. And that's the story of many people. And usually there's some metaphysical event that happens, like you lose your job or the pandemic hits and you're forced to follow your calling. And that's so common with women entrepreneurs that I work with and talk to as well. So content, yes, it's everywhere. If you're not consistent, if you're not a good storyteller, if you're not stopping the scroll and having something interesting, unique to say, it's really hard to stand out in our digital channels. So let's start with some mistakes. What are some of the mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make in content that they post?
This is a great question. And I think it's an important one to discuss, because as we both know, when you're an entrepreneur, you are probably wearing multiple hats, and you simply don't have all these hours in the day to be doing content in an ineffective way, which is often what unwittingly happens. And so some of the mistakes that I see that really kind of contribute to this lack of efficiency and just this time suck of creating content that can weigh down on entrepreneurs. The first one would be creating the content before you have your marketing foundation in place. And for me, it's not a make work project, but it's really critical work that needs to be done in terms of your brand messaging and your content strategy. And of course, we don't necessarily need to wait until absolutely everything is perfect, right? I'm not advocating that, but it can be as simple as having a 1 or 2 page messaging document, playbooks, I like to call them, or strategy. It doesn't need to be this giant thing. Having a really concise but powerful playbook and content strategy can get you a long way when you go to create content, because what my clients will often say to me is one of the biggest problems they have is they'll sit down at their screen, and even though their expertise is really strong, they know their stuff, they know what they're doing, they kind of get stuck in this paralysis of, not knowing what to post. And it ends up eating up so much of their valuable time. So just start with a playbook, start with a strategy, and, you'll be so much further ahead. But what I want to say about the strategy, which is another mistake I see, is that the key thing here is to actually tie your content tactics to business goals. So it's not so much about posting a certain number of times a week because a guru said you should do so. It's really about what are the 3 key areas that I want to move forward in my business, and which content strategies and tactics will actually be appropriate for that. Because depending on your audience and depending on your business, of course, there's going to be a lot of variety. So you need to take that time up front to get clear on A, your customers, like you can never do enough customer research, and B, your specific business goals. And then I think, you're positioned to start creating content from that place where you'll never have to be sitting there staring at a blank screen and trying to come up with something from scratch.
So let's peel back that to another layer or two in what is involved in a content strategy.
Yeah. So what we always like to start with, as I mentioned, is that customer research piece. And the reason why is because of course, we have an idea of our messaging and what we want to say and our voice. And while that's important and it should play a role in our brand, our customers actually play a much bigger role in shaping our brand than we might think that they do. And so by interviewing them regularly, it's not a one and done activity, by interviewing them regularly and getting, these really rich insights that are kind of up to the minute, because industries change, right? The market changes, business landscapes change. The things that were their top 3 pain points a year ago might not be today. And unless you sort of re-engage with them in that way, you won't have that information. So I'd start there. And then there's a lot of different words we can use for this, like ideal client profile, customer avatar, all of those things, but just have a really solid idea of that before you start creating content.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And if you're successful in business, you're having customer conversations all the time, whether you call them clients or customers, doesn't really matter. But I find that the things people say in those conversations are great post starters.
Oh, yes.
Because there you have this built-in story of here's what someone said or here's what someone thinks, and then you can unravel the story and create what I call a paradigm shift, and then help people think differently about that issue.
I love that.
Right? So we were just talking, my social seller and I, Christina and I, were just talking about some of the things that people are saying about whether or not it's time for them to hire a coach. I want to try things out on my own for a while first and make some revenue. It's almost like this chicken and egg, so I was just sitting here thinking, oh, I need to make a chicken and egg post because people are thinking about it the wrong way. And so those are the kinds of pieces of data that you get on a regular basis that are useful content creators. Now, that's kind of like connecting to the client where they are, but you said something before in the playbook. So around the brand messaging, and my sense is that that's a deeper study of what you want to be known for, or what is the brand that you want to promote in the market. Tell us a little bit more about the playbook and what that entails.
Well, first of all, absolutely agree with everything you said. And I love the idea of that paradigm shift, because that's the whole point with content, right? You've got to get their attention. And if you can get them thinking differently, that's one excellent way to do that. But with the messaging specifically, of course, it does take into account those client insights from the interviews. But as you said, there's really also that piece of where do I want to put my stake in the ground and what do I want to be known for? And that's where the thought leadership comes into it. And I know that that's become almost a buzzword because it's so widely talked about, but it is for a reason, right? It's really important. There can be numerous other coaches or competitors in your industry, but what about your point of view is unique? And only when you sort of get quiet, get strategic, and really figure that out, will you be able to weave that into your content. What the playbook does is, again, it gives you that place where you're never sort of starting from scratch. You're never putting out content that's off brand, because you have this resource that outlines not only the foundational things like your mission, vision, values, and why you do the work you do, but it also outlines your brand personality and voice, what it is and what it isn't. In an ideal scenario, you'd want examples of how it's used in context. And then it will highlight your key messages, or you may want to think of them as your value propositions. But those are essentially the 5 or so statements about your company that really are the essence of your brand. And you don't necessarily need to use those word for word in your content. But, for example, something that I always talk about with our brand is the ability of long form content to build trust. And so this idea of building trust is really one of those key messages that I keep coming back to. Now, I can talk about that in 50 different ways, but I just know, okay, that maybe I'm sitting down one day, I want to craft a LinkedIn post, and instead of racking my brain for 30 minutes on what to write about, I can look at my playbook and I know I have those key areas of things that I want to be known for and speak about those. So it'll really help in that area. And what's great about it too is that you've got an assistant or someone that's working with you to help with those things. It enables you to make sure that everybody on your team is operating from a cohesive place.
Mm-hmm. That's great point. Great point. And we'll talk a little bit about AI tools in a moment, but even if you are using AI tools, you have to have that clarity on your brand messaging and what you stand for, because AI tools are great assistants, They're not great creators. And so I think it's so interesting. I'd love for you to talk about, because we're hearing it a lot right now, about brand voice and brand personality in writing. And what does that mean exactly?
I think especially with that conversation around AI, we are hearing it more because it's become even more important to have a distinct brand voice. And so what I always say is, I actually love that you asked me what that means, because people throw it around. So it's like, okay, well, what is a distinct brand voice and why does that matter? And how do I create one? And we actually have a whole entire blog post on this topic, but authenticity is one of the first things. Again, I know it's a buzzword, but these things are foundational because they matter and because they work, right? So when we look at authenticity, we want to think about originality. How true is it to you? And this whole idea of congruence in your brand. So if someone goes to your website, the content is presented in a certain voice, then they hop over to your LinkedIn or your Instagram and it sounds totally different. Then they have perhaps a discovery call with you. And again, it's like a completely different person. Which one is truly you? And that can detract from that credibility and trust when you have that sort of lack of authenticity. So that's something that, again, it's not always easy to hone. Like you do have to really sit, get quiet, think about it. But that will enable you to have content that's instantly recognizable as yours. That's the whole thing, is that we want to build recognition. And when someone knows it comes from you every single time because it's authentic to you, you're going to immediately accelerate sort of that whole recognition and affinity building process.
And what makes a tone or content authentic to the individual? Because I'm sitting here and I'm trying to apply it to myself. Like, I know people frequently comment, "Thank you for keeping it real, Deb. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for your authenticity." But what does that really mean when you're creating content? Because usually that happens when I'm just like stream of consciousness and just like posting like some experience or something that happened to me and how I thought about it and how that changed me or something I'm going through. But that's not always appropriate, especially if you're a B2B marketer. So what does authenticity and your brand voice mean when you're marketing to businesses?
I think the first thing I would say is, even when we're marketing to businesses, we are still marketing to humans. And so they don't want to feel like it's kind of this cold, faceless corporation. But I would say so you can tell me, this will be fun. You can tell me if I'm on the mark or not. But when I read your content, I always get this mix of like highly, highly knowledgeable about what you do and also no nonsense. But there's also this level of compassion. And I don't know, I get that from you. And it's dependent on the person, right? But when your content is authentic to you, to me, that simply means that it's the things that you value in business, what you're bringing to the table, your lived experience, the reasons why you do things that you do. And that's why we kind of do this in a chronological order of like the mission, vision, values. You have to operate from a place of purpose. And then, you are in integrity. And I think naturally, if you sort of define a brand personality and know and live those characteristics, then the content will be authentic to you. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I appreciate that mirror. I appreciate the intellect and the compassion.
Well, yeah, the highly knowledgeable, it's clear that you know your stuff. Like I get the no nonsense from you. I love it. And also the compassion, and that, you've been there and you're going to guide your clients through. I mean, that's just what I get from you. But, and that's why I do think that we don't want to create these things in a vacuum. And it can be really nice to get the insights of others, whether it's a trusted partner or colleague in your industry, or whether it's your clients, and kind of ask them how they perceive your brand. And there's this balance that needs to be struck between what resonates with you and what resonates with them. But when you strike it, it's just like, it's a beautiful thing, because all your content does really become very recognizable.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Afton. And I was thinking the same thing as you were saying it. Like, I would reach out to people and say, what comes through in my content? What does it tell you about me? Because we've all read those posts where it feels like people are talking at you. and they're trying to like give you advice, but you have no basis for trust or understanding, where they're coming from. And there's also a lot of people who are saying the same thing, and it almost looks like there's a lot of recycled content out there. It lacks innovation. It lacks a unique point of view. And the more crowded the playing field gets, the more difficult it is to have a unique point of view. You really have to craft that personal brand. So I think this is not a nice to have. This is a need to have that brand voice.
I completely agree. Yeah, it absolutely is that. And it is getting more and more crowded. And I think not to deter anyone, it's just that, like you said, you have to be really expert and strategic.
You have to.
Yeah.
You just have to get more consistent, which was the other point that we wanted to make today, is that, I always say consistency wins hands down every time. There might be someone who's a better writer than you, but if they're only writing once a week and you're writing every day, you're more consistent and you'll get more eyeballs on your content and more people engaged in what you have to offer.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. And that's where a lot of people fall down.
Yeah, they do. And even like with podcasts as a content platform, for instance, there's something known as pod fade. A lot of people start podcasts, but then they're not consistent. And I think this episode will be around 150 for us.
Oh, wow.
We launched in February of 2020. Before the pandemic, I wasn't planning on launching a podcast because I was at home. I launched a podcast right before I was home a lot. So it was a great channel for me to reach out to the world, but most people aren't consistent, and that's so important.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. So I have a question for you on content formats, because so far we've been kind of mostly talking around long form content, and I've even seen carousels turn to long form carousels. They're no longer just these little pithy statements that you flip through or pictures. People are actually telling stories through the carousels. What are you seeing with your clients? What's working best as far as content formats?
I'm seeing that as well. And certainly I would say I'm biased because we are a long form content studio, so I can speak more about that. But I think what's just something that's like tried and true across the board that I feel like is always going to work really well when done properly is the client success story, whether you call it that or a customer story or a case study. And the reason why this works so well, again, goes back to that trust and credibility piece. And there's so much more credence in, one of my clients or one of your clients telling the story of how they worked with you and got results than there is in me sitting here and saying, Scratch National, so great, here's what we can do. And I think that this is just going to be something that's always a pillar of content marketing, but it does need to be done in a tasteful way. And it really does need to be about that client, and it needs to make them the hero of the story. But it also needs to make it clear what their journey was, and it needs to enable your other potential clients to see themselves in their shoes.
Really great insight there that carousels are a great format for client stories. And it got me thinking that, there is also a benefit for the client too, to be profiled on your feed to your followers and to be able to tell their story. You got me thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because so we often think about customer success stories as a sales enablement tool, but you're absolutely right. They can actually also be a fantastic retention and just a celebration of that person because, again, it's talking about how it's their accomplishments. Like, yes, obviously with the help of the entrepreneur, the person who's publishing the case study, but it's they're front and center, and who doesn't like to be celebrated, right? And to be recognized for the work that they put in.
Yeah. And it's also a little bit of reciprocity. I mean, the same reason why I'm always happy to get on and do a live testimonial for one of my coaches, when I get benefit from our relationship and working together. I love to tell my story and love to elevate my coach in the process. So it's really good marketing both ways. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, it is. It's just so much more powerful than what we can do on our own. And I mean, I think that really just is such a tenet of business. Like we can do so much more with others than we can on our own, but that's actually a content format that completely exemplifies that.
Yeah. So I know you're a fan of good foundational marketing and not just trendy things. I'm going to ask you a pointed question. Are blogs dead?
Oh, I love that question. Blogs are absolutely not dead. Certainly, at least not yet. I think that search is still a really powerful tool, and people are absolutely still getting information from blogs, and they're using them to evaluate vendors. It's still, organic traffic is still something where if you want to increase your audience, increase your visibility, that's a strategy that's absolutely worth exploring. But with anything, it has to be done right. So I'd go back to the strategy and I would say, yes, quality writing in a blog is important, but I would counter that almost just as much time, if not more time, should be spent on thinking about the topics that your audience most wants to hear about. Because if you're going to put in the time and effort to create a blog, it needs to be really compelling and it needs to be aligned with our search intent. And so I'd say really focus there. And then obviously you want to look at making sure it's really well written, easy to navigate, and that it is actually aligned with the search intent that they have. So, and again, that goes back to the trust. We don't want to slap a clickbaity, catchy title on a blog, but then not actually deliver that information in the piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So SEO is important. And how can people have their posts be more, for lack of a better term, SEO friendly? How can you incorporate that into a blog? Like, what's the best process? So here I am, I'm sitting down, I have a topic that I know my clients care about. I'm sitting down to write a blog. What should my thought process be about creating that piece of content?
So I think just some upfront keyword research and time spent, whether it's, there are even some great free courses that people can take on that. Or if it's something, maybe that is a good thing to task a virtual assistant with, or even hiring an SEO person, however you go about it. I would say just spending time on doing that, because even if you have your topic, you're so right that the post does need to be optimized for search, because otherwise people are not going to find it. And so the keywords that you choose, and then I won't go through everything here, but like there's essentially optimization checklist that you can follow to make sure that the blog is crafted in a certain way so that it will be picked up by search engines, because you can't just sort of pick any keyword. It depends on the domain authority of your website and things like that. So again, I just say taking a bit of time up front, it goes such a long way, because you could do that research in, a span of a few hours, and then you could have everything so that every month when you go back to write your post, you just refer to that research that you did once. You don't have to do that again every time. Of course, there are strategies you want to think about, like updating your posts and re-optimizing them and things like that. But I would say don't worry about that, just to get going.
Yeah. Is there an optimal length for a blog post?
Longer is actually better, contrary to what a lot of people think. Yeah, so people, I get asked a lot, like in the same way you asked if blogs are dead, I'll get asked, like, do people still read anymore? And again, it comes back to the quality of the information. So if it's valuable to them and if it's entertaining to them and if it's serving a purpose, absolutely they'll read. If it's sort of, no offense to anybody, I hate to call this out, but these posts where it's like, what I did on my summer vacation, that's not really like, I don't personally feel that there should be a blog about that. I think we need to always be thinking about how we serve our clients and what they want to learn. So the ideal length would be at least 1,000 words, and some people would even have it going up as high as 2,500 words.
Interesting. And is there a particular framework that people can think about creating content within? I always teach my clients about the hook and the headline, is so important. And, there are tools you can use. What do you think of Answer the Public? Have you ever heard of that tool? Is that useful?
Yeah, I've heard of that. And so I think I haven't been too familiar with it for a while. At Scribe, we do use SEMrush, which is like a paid SEO tool, it's fantastic. But I would not suggest that everybody needs to go out and do that. So I think something like Answer the Public, or even when you type into Google and see like what people are also searching for, that can be a really good way to see what other keywords might be related to the topic that you're talking about. There are free tools, even Moz. How do you Moz? M-O-Z. Yeah, M-O-Z, Moz.com. It's just if you go there, you can even get, I think, 10 free keyword searches per month. So this is not something that I think people need to shell out any money on right away. If blogging is going to become a big part of your strategy, sure, absolutely. But it can certainly be done for free. There's no reason why not.
And what's the difference between a really great blog post and one that's kind of,
There are a few things. I think what you said, the hook, is very important because that's what's going to get them to keep reading. And so if you can't do that, then it's unlikely that they'll sort of progress through the post. But first and foremost, again, I think the topic, it being aligned with their search intent, is it helping them solve a problem? What's the purpose of the blog post, right? And that goes for any piece of content, even social media, even an email that you're sending out. What is the purpose? And if the content has purpose, it's already going to be ahead of a lot of the content that gets created just because. But yeah, so your purpose, what it's helping the reader with, the hook, the way it's structured, there are a lot of technical writing things. I won't get into a lot of them here, but the way that sentences are structured. So it's nice to have sort of like a mix of shorter and longer sentences. You want there to be a good flow. There are a whole bunch of web writing technicalities that I could get into. But another thing I think I'll say, just kind of skipping to the end, is a strong call to action. So what do you actually want your reader to do? Because if you've written a great blog post up until now, that's fantastic. But that's even more reason to have a great call to action, because they probably are quite interested in either the topic or working with you by then. And if you leave this off, it doesn't give them any step to take next.
Yeah, fantastic. And last question for you is newsletters. Like, what's the difference between a blog and a newsletter? And can a blog serve multiple purposes? Can a blog be a newsletter? Can it be a social media post? What do you think?
Yeah, to that last question, yes, it can and it should. And I think especially for entrepreneurs, like I said at the beginning, a lot of us, it's not like we have all these extra hours in the day. And so I feel that content repurposing is very important. So absolutely, everything that you just said, yes, it should. And then to the first question of the difference, if you are sort of just repurposing your blog and your newsletter, then there may not be that much of a difference. But a newsletter is kind of also another opportunity for you. The blog perhaps could be one element of it, and you're not sharing the whole thing. You're linking out to your website. Other elements of it could be what kind of offers you have going on, right? We don't want the newsletters to be too promotional, but again, it's a good opportunity to have a call to action to work with you. So if you have a webinar coming up, if you have a roundtable or something like that, this is a great place to include that. It can also even be an invitation for coaches. It could be an invitation to ask questions of readers, right? Get them to interact with you. Ask them, if it resonated, to reply. Ask them what's on their mind. So it's a tool for two-way communication, or it can be. It has a potential.
That's a great insight, that sometimes we're in broadcast mode and not necessarily inviting people to have a conversation with us. That's so great. We've had so many insights from this conversation with you today, Afton. I thank you so much for sharing with us. Is there any way that our audience can keep in touch with you? Is there something that you offer that might be helpful as they start thinking about hiring someone to write copy for them or writing copy on their own?
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you so much for having me on. I love the questions that you've asked. I feel like it's been a fantastic conversation. So if people want to get in touch with me, scribenational.ca is our website. I'm active on both LinkedIn and Instagram, so you can find me there. Afton Brazzoni. The Scribe National does have a company page as well on LinkedIn. And in terms of offerings or tools that people can use, we have a resources section on our website where we do have our blog, which delves into a lot of things you and I talked about today, Deb, and also does have some free tools as well, like a brand guide and a content checklist and things like that.
Oh, that's fantastic. So go to scribenational.ca, go to the resources section. There are checklists and tools there that you can download and use as you create your own content. And thank you so much, Afton, for joining us here today. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thanks again, Deb. Take care.
Thanks for listening, my friend. If you enjoyed this show, please head over to iTunes and subscribe and leave us a review. And be sure to hop over to the Life After Corporate Facebook group and join other growing entrepreneurs to get weekly tips on how to create more money and meaning doing work you love.